Okay, welcome to today's episode of Forward Thinking. We have on today's podcast Leah Allen. She's the VP of Marketing at ModelN, and Leah is actually one of our past clients and current clients. And we have her on today to talk about a very important topic to all you marketers out there, and that's reporting and what metrics you should care about. And when we decided we want to talk about metrics and reporting, we thought of Leah because it's a big part of her world and her role. Working with her team in marketing for a post-IPO company, metrics are super important, profitability, revenue, pipeline. And Leah takes a great approach that we think a lot of marketers can look up to because she's really focusing on the metrics that matter and that her board and C-suite really care about. So thanks so much for being on today, Leah.
Yeah, my pleasure. One of my favorite topics.
Okay, so we're just going to dive right into it for everyone. And, I want to know, Charlie wants to know, what are the metrics that you care about?
Yeah, absolutely. So at the highest level, the metrics I care about are the metrics the company cares about. So pipeline and revenue. That's how we're set up at ModelN. Every week, marketing reports our overall pipeline trends and quarterly pipeline coverage to the C-suite. And now, to be clear, that is looking at our total ARR pipeline, not just what marketing contributes, but we really are taking that holistic view of total pipeline. And of course, these metrics are critical to understanding our ability to meet our bookings targets each quarter. And that's really important to our sales team and to the company overall. They're also really important to our CEO and our CFO as they're thinking about how to set guidance with Wall Street. We do look at what marketing contributes, marketing source pipeline, marketing sourced closed won bookings. But the goal there is we really look at that only internally within marketing. And the goal there is to understand what's working and not working and to invest in what matters in moving the business forward versus any kind of credit or us versus them.
Yeah, and I think having that that focus on revenue and pipeline is one of the things that, like Chrissy mentioned, was why we're so excited to have you on, because we see a lot of companies or a lot of marketers get a little bit tied up in some of the early stage metrics. And I think, as we were discussing this before, there's pros and cons to that, and there's different business models kind of lead to different metrics that you care about. But I think from your point of view, that laser focused on what really, really matters to the business, and then owning that from a marketing organization to be able to develop those metrics and the strategy behind getting that data and getting it for the business is something that I've always really admired of you. And so I think from the next question though, so to you, why is it important for you to really have a target around your bookings, pipeline, revenue from marketing? And how have you seen that really impact what you do as a marketing organization at ModelN?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think first of all, it's the primary way where you can align the marketing investment to the business strategy. So, when you're having conversations about what should the marketing budget be, how do you define what that budget is and how do you justify it? When you can tie it to bookings and to revenue, you're able to, it's a much more clear conversation. So for example, this year in our planning, we're able to show that in order to get X amount more bookings, you need to invest Y amount more in marketing programs. And so then, we think you have your CFO hat on and you think about, why would I want to invest more in marketing? You can see the direct correlation between investing more in marketing and then getting more pipeline and then bookings out of it ultimately. And then, that's kind of the cross-functional, as you're partnering with finance. And then I would also say it really helps you make sure that you're designing the right marketing programs for what the company actually needs. So for the past couple of years, I've developed a pipeline model for the company where you take the bookings target, you take assumptions about where those dollars are going to come from for the next 2 years around maybe it's specific verticals, maybe it's customers, prospects, and you put all those in, and then what you get out is the amount of pipeline you need across each go-to-market play. And then that can tell you then, okay, therefore, these are the programs that we need to run in order to achieve these booking targets across plays. And so sometimes, and while I think marketing teams often you can take an educated guess about the design of your program mix. But when you really map it out and you have that numbers basis underlying it, you make out some insights that you didn't see before and adjustments that you may need to make in terms of your programs. So for example, this year, when we did all of that math and we realized what the model was telling us is that we needed to invest more in customer programs and in pipeline programs, marketing to deals are already in pipeline in order to achieve the pipeline or the bookings mix that the company was expecting. So that was, that really helped us to define our strategy for the year in a way that we wouldn't have in such a specificity if we hadn't had that analysis that was tied to bookings.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, when they hear that and they go, okay, I need to develop this model and I need to come up with my assumptions and build out, I do that math to try and figure out, they don't know where to start and they don't know what assumptions to make. I'd love to kind of dive into everything you described there a little bit more. Like what were some of the assumptions that you made and what were some of the key metrics that you were looking at, conversion rates, things like that really helped you build out that model?
Yeah, absolutely. So the model really starts with what the bookings assumptions are going to be for the next 2 years, because we have a long sales cycle at ModelN. So in this coming fiscal year, we need to build some pipeline for this year, and then pipeline for the following year. So we need to know what the bookings targets are going to be this year and next year, and then what that mix is. We have a vertical strategy. So how much in terms of bookings are we going to get from each vertical, and how much are we going to get from customer and prospect? And that comes for us. I work with our head of strategy. I validate it with finance and with sales. So those are the key groups as that top line input. So that's really where it all starts. And then you do need some assumptions around, you need to know how long your sales cycle is, right? That's one key assumption. You need to know what your conversion rate is. So how much of pipeline turns into close one? Is it 3 times your bookings number? Is it 4 times your bookings number? And then that factors into the assumptions. And then I think you can break it down more in a more granular way as it makes sense for your business. But I think those are kind of the key assumptions that you need to start the model. And then we've also evolved it over time. The first version of the model was a bit simpler, and then the next year we added in more complexity as we learned more and as we used it, and we're continuing to refine it.
Yeah, and I loved what you said there about working with the other teams and like getting that cross-functional thought around getting all of the information you need from them. Also, marketing being involved, right? Because like a lot of the pipeline conversations is sometimes driven from sales, but I think in your case, marketing is like right there with sales in that whole dynamic. And I think that marketing can add a ton of value, right? I mean, marketing is obviously there to help create the pipeline for sales, but be able to have that partnership. Have you found that to be like an important part of making this model as accurate as you can?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Critical. I mean, and I think one key reason for that is that you want all of those teams, marketing, sales, and finance, to be saying the same thing, right? Like as everyone reports up to their respective C-suite executive, you want to have the same story so that you're giving them clear guidance, and that it's also clear that we've vetted everything out, right? That sales has had their say, marketing's had their say, finance has had their say, and then we've uncovered all the potential wrinkles in it, and we have a clear, coherent story that we're bringing forward to the C-suite. And then there's a lot in marketing. is an incredibly cross-functional discipline, and having those relationships with finance and with sales ops, then in order to get your work done, in order to even achieve that pipeline, you're going to need to partner closely with those people as you execute your plan also. So it's important for multiple reasons.
Yeah, and you're all looking at the same number. We see a lot of problems where marketing is kind of like generating their pipeline, and they've got their number over here that they're trying to track. Sales has got their number over here, and there's just that misalignment, and everyone gets into a meeting, and you end up spending most of the time trying to figure out like, okay, what is the right number? Like, what are we trying to shoot for from a pipeline point of view? But you started off with that alignment, and it wasn't like you had to kind of get there afterwards. So I think that's a massively important point.
Totally. And I think we see that a lot too. Which creates this like disjointed experience too, whenever those reports like need to come into play. Like when you enter the boardroom, like we've heard so many times from people that, marketing told a different story than sales, but marketing was talking about, something over here, and really people, if they actually were paying attention, connecting the dots, are like, why was sales talking about pipeline being this, but then marketing was talking about this? And so when you do enter with the same story, it's just, overall makes your team look better, but it's also just more reliable, and you have like one source of truth. So,
and I just wanted to, go back to one other thing you said that I really liked around the importance of marketing, having this number being part of it, and not ending up being a cost center, right? If marketing can really tie themselves to revenue, you can get that budget, right? How many marketing teams are trying to fight for budget right now, especially in our marketing ops world, like trying to get more headcount in MOPS is really difficult. But if marketing is able to really say, okay, this is literally how much we're contributing to the bottom line of the business, and you have that really robustly built out, and everyone trusts that number, then that's a much easier budget conversation when the business wants to grow next year, and you say, okay, for us to grow, we need more pipeline. For us to have more pipeline, we need more budget. Right. So I just wanted to really call that out there.
Yeah, exactly. It's the science side of marketing that I think really ties it to. It's a partnership. It's a go-to-market team, right? Sales and marketing together. And when you do that science of it, then you can show how that exactly works, right? And show that partnership.
Yeah. And I think that's a good kind of segue into what I want to talk about next, because there's the numbers, there's creating the data structure, and, marketing ops can be a great resource for helping develop that, and partnering with, the head of marketing like yourself, or VP of marketing, CMO, everyone across the C-suite, like you're looked at to provide those numbers. But I think a big part of that is also then developing the narrative. Like you said, you are reporting back up to your C-level who you report into, or then you need to take that and talk about it as to your board. And just the narrative really can be changed depending on who you're talking to. So, how important has developing a narrative with your data and reporting been for you? And can you give an example maybe recently of, who the person you were giving that narrative to, like maybe based on their role, how you developed it and why that was super important?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that the narrative and the story around the data are so critical to being able to turn the data into action. We're inundated with data. We have so much at our fingertips, but what does it all mean, and what can you do with it? That's really the tricky question. So the way that we look at it, I think there are four if you include the marketing team itself, but I think they're outside of marketing. There are three core lenses through which we look at telling the marketing story. So one is in partnership with sales, one is in partnership with product, and then lastly is our CEO and our CFO. So when we're thinking about each of those, we spend a lot of time putting ourselves in those people's shoes. From a sales perspective, what do they care about? What do they want to understand? What would be useful for them to understand about marketing? Same thing from a product perspective. And then for our CEO, most recently, we did a deep dive on our pipeline dynamics for him to really understand what was going on in the business. And again, he's not looking at this in terms of marketing source pipeline. He doesn't, from his view, it's not about marketing versus sales or who's contributing what, where. It's about how's the health of the business, right? How pipeline is a leading indicator of how we're going to be doing in the coming quarters. And insightful for him in terms of how he is thinking about, we're in our Q4 right now. How's he thinking about giving guidance for the next fiscal year to Wall Street? And so understanding our pipeline dynamics was really important to him. And so we spent a lot of time refining really even the questions that we wanted to answer for him. And then making sure that we had all of the data, critical to have marketing ops rock stars helping you ensure the data is absolutely perfect. And then turning that into a story that's digestible from his perspective, from the CEO's perspective. And he's not, he doesn't think about the marketing data on a regular basis, nor he's not interested in that. He wants to understand, like, what is this telling us about the business? So I think being able to translate the data into something that's useful and interesting to him was so important there, and giving him the insights he needed to run the business overall.
Yeah, can you go into some of the narratives that you're able to show? Like maybe not kind of specifics around, the ins and outs of kind of exactly what the numbers were, of course, but more around kind of the type of reports, the way you would tease out that narrative and the kind of information at a high level that you were able to give to those three different groups that you mentioned.
Yeah. I think, at the highest level. So if I'm thinking about the story for our CEO, we looked at overall pipeline and what the mix of that pipeline was or is. So is it, made up of customers and new logos? What's the breakdown between our two core verticals? And what is that trend over time? So we could see kind of, what the total open pipeline was looking like over time. We also look at, so that's sort of moment in time as it continues across the months and quarters. Then we also look at pipeline coverage, which is looking at pipeline by close date. So that is looking at close date by quarter. So it's he is looking at, okay, for next quarter, do we have enough pipeline coverage to meet our bookings target? And how does that look for the coming 4 quarters? And what is also that made up of in terms of vertical split and customer prospect split? We also look at pipeline development. So new opportunities that are created, that's kind of earlier stage. And we look at new pipeline that's created. So are we continuing to add to that pipeline over time? And then something that is somewhat new that we've introduced in the past couple of quarters that's been really well received, actually that Charlie partnered with me on creating, is a slide around target account engagement. And so from a ModelN perspective, we have this very targeted go-to-market strategy. We know who our target accounts are, and we have tiered them in terms of most valuable A, B, and C. And then we developed this chart that showed our engagement from a marketing perspective and a sales perspective. We sort of classify the different levels of engagement of those target accounts with us. So that's been really helpful because that's a question that our CEO has asked us, like, okay, we know that we have these X target accounts. How well are we engaging them? Like, give me a view of what that looks like. And so that view has been really well received.
Yeah, I think that's really important for a lot of people listening because I'm hearing that more and more from our clients, but also people in the space. I think from even a top level, they're thinking about, okay, how are we doing engaging our target accounts? I hear more and more C-levels actually care about that, where I feel like before that was more of a, head of marketing to a head of sales conversation. And I think, or head of demand gen. And I think now it's going beyond that because they know, okay, that's our big go-to-market strategy, that marketing's done the work to evangelize within the organization that this is what we're going to do. And so then that becomes a big focus. I have, they're like, I have my sales team and market team focusing on this big thing. Okay, what's the impact of that?
Right.
And so adding that extra layer to see the effectiveness of ABM and that strategy is getting, much more higher level attention for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and especially from ModelN, you've refined your target account list, your total addressable market, really down to the right companies, right? Like you really do know, like individually each company, like if that's the right company to target or not. So it is such a fundamental part of the whole business strategy, right? It's not just like you have one person in marketing doing ABM, right? It is literally what you're doing all day long. So to be able to tell that narrative to your C-suite, to be able to show the development within those target accounts is really important. And I'm glad it's been going down well.
And I think the thing I really like about a lot of those reports that you're talking about, and at the same time as a full team, you can really draw areas to focus on and next steps to really create action. And so, if you're lacking pipeline in a certain vertical or region or you're not seeing velocity, or maybe you're really struggling in a conversion from, a demo to actual pipeline, those are all things that can be combated with a sales and marketing tactic or something to remedy it so that you can get ahead of that. And when you are looking that far out from pipeline, that's super important to maintain the health of the business instead of this oh shit moment. Especially when you have a long sales cycle, you don't have time to do that. You're not like, oh, don't worry guys, we'll get it next month. No, you would have been having to do that like 5 months ago.
Yeah,
so it is super important for you to look ahead that way and really take action.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think, that's actually been an area that we've been developing sort of a new muscle at ModelN around thinking about, the pipeline we create today turns into bookings, X number of quarters from now. Because we, and being a public company, we're focused on bookings quarterly goals, and next quarter, it's a little more kind of, as we need to be, focused on more of what's in front of you. And so we've been sort of building the muscle around thinking a little bit further out for market investment. Yeah.
Yeah. And to tie it together from an ABM strategy, we talked about this on a previous podcast with Shanal Narayan from Everstring, and we were talking about how it takes time. Yeah. And so, I think that further then knows, okay, we do need to look more ahead, because knowing that these campaigns are going to take time and getting into those big accounts takes time as well. So not only do you have your long sales cycle ahead of you, but even penetrating that account and getting engagement will take some time. And so that you need to plan for that and see how it then can impact you in the future and when you should start really. So.
Yeah, so one of the things that we were talking about before we started was around metrics that other marketers focus on you don't track as closely. And you had an interesting perspective around how, ModelN with your go-to-market right now, that has led you down a path to focus on a specific set of metrics that may not be, exactly, other companies may want to still focus on that, but they might have other metrics they focus on. It's very contextual based on the business. Can you elaborate on that for me there?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think, one example that I was thinking about in terms of, metrics that are just less important to ModelN given our go-to-market strategy is net new leads. So, for some marketing teams, if you have, it's more of an SMB play, or you have kind of a broader horizontal software product where you're still figuring out, either truly is broad, or you're still kind of refining what industries are going to be the best fit for you. Looking at new names in your database is really insightful and a really useful metric to look at. For us at ModelN, it's not actually, because we know the companies who are going to be our next best customers. And so our goal is to have a fully built out database with all of the those target accounts, all of the key contacts who are important influencers and decision makers for us at those accounts, And then our job in marketing is to go engage them. So if we see, somebody fills out a form on the website and they're not part of our target markets, we look at it, but we're not spending a lot of time and energy on it because they're most likely not going to become a customer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that I love as well, like kind of tying this back to what we do in marketing operations. It's like that whole building out everything you need to be able to be that laser focused on your target accounts it's such a MOPS thing, right? Like I think a lot of companies there might be a sales initiative and they might try and lead it, or they might have like different pockets of people kind of talking about it. But where I see it works really well is when marketing operations can really take the lead on that data strategy to be able to support the business there. So you really do know, who we're trying to target. Do we have all of the right people here? Who are they? Is this data relevant and new? So trying to tie it back to MOPS there quickly. And one thing you touched on a second ago was the pressures of being a public company. Mm-hmm. How has that influenced your whole opinion and philosophy around data and reporting versus some of the public companies you worked at previously?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so I think it is very different to be driving profitable growth compared with just growth that a venture-backed smaller private company would be looking for. And I think the difference is at ModelN, our efficiency metrics are really important. So if you put a dollar of marketing program spend in, how much pipeline, how much revenue do you get on the other end? And we are just very data driven. There's a lot more interest in these level of metrics and this sophistication with how we look at pipeline and the overall trends and the tying of marketing to bookings. There's just a lot of engagement and interest at the C-level in doing this. I think because we want to make sure that every dollar spent is efficient and that we're using all of our levers in order to run the business most effectively. I think we also have really good partners in sales ops and in finance ops, sort of. That's not what they call themselves, but they're people who are, in finance who really are focused on the same type of, they look at it with a slightly different lens, but same type of metrics and data. And so we really have strong partners at the company to work with from a marketing to finance to sales operations perspective.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I think we're almost getting up on time here, and we've saved a really good question for last around, and we like to give whoever's listening to this some really actionable advice. And there's just like so much to discuss when it comes to reporting and metrics, but when it comes to everything we talked about, which I think a lot of it is around focusing on the right metrics, revenue pipeline, obviously you can add to that, but that is if you're not focusing on that as a marketer, you really need to. But like, if you are someone trying to develop that, right? You're still haven't matured to that level yet. What is some really good advice that you could give them on how to take that first step, second step, and so on?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I had a few things I would recommend. So one we've talked about a number of times in this conversation is getting really close with finance and sales ops. So that's the partnership aspect of it that we've talked about cross-functionally, and then that's where you're going to get what the bookings targets are. I mean, so as I mentioned, our pipeline model starts with bookings targets. So go find out what the bookings targets are for this year and next year if you don't have those already, and any quarterly breakdown that you may have, any segmentation breakdown that you may have to get you that right starting point. And then secondly, I would make sure that your system of measurement is decided. So even though we've been talking about overall pipeline and revenue, I think it's really important to agree on a model of measurement for marketing. So are you going to use last touch model, multi-touch model? I know Charlie and I've had this conversation over the years many, many times of what's the best strategy and how to communicate it. But I think it's just really important, because if you don't have it, it can make answering really just simple questions really hard. Like, how well is marketing doing? And you're like, well, we have this data and our ads produce this, and there, can go down kind of this rat hole. And so I think getting clear on how you're going to measure marketing contribution to pipeline is really important. And then thirdly, I would say analyze the last couple of years of data if you have it. Get into Salesforce or get an analyst to help you get into Salesforce and figure out what the dynamics are of your pipeline, even just for you to understand it kind of yourself, and maybe start to think about how you might start talking to people about it. How long does it take pipeline to close? What channels are contributing to pipeline? How much coverage do you need to meet your bookings targets? And start trying to answer some of those questions.
Yeah. So on that second one, I know this is the $1 million question, but and every company is very, very different. But do you have a strong opinion on or advice on where to start when it comes to defining and deciding what is going to be the way you're going to track marketing contribution to pipeline?
I mean, I feel like I always, and I want to use multi-touch attribution. That is my ideal, because it makes so much sense, right? Like, especially in a long B2B sales cycle, all these different channels contribute to what's turning into pipeline. But digesting a multi-touch attribution model cross-functionally is very hard. And explaining it outside of marketing is very hard. So we still sometimes use multi-touch to understand, which channels are performing well within marketing. It's not something we've been able to use in these kind of broader company-wide conversations or cross-functional conversations. So I feel like I always end up at last touch. So that's what we use. We use primary campaign source on the opportunity to do a last touch model.
Yeah, I mean, there's pros and cons to every single one, right? So really, your North Star should be, what is everyone going to understand? Because you could have the fanciest multi-touch thing going, but if no one understands it, you've lost the ability to really use that data, and everyone needs to be able to use that data, get on board with it, talk the same language. And if or you're spending 45 minutes of an hour meeting trying to explain multi-touch to people, that probably could be better placed with a simpler model. It's easier to understand. We talk about it a lot, giving you that directional information that is still valuable, that you can then get down to business. And with everything with data, you have to interpret it. You have to try and understand it, really try and use it without, it's not always going to be 100% on the dot every time. But you have to be able to understand that and use it in the right way and interpret it. And I think the reason that they all have their pros and cons, so that just having one that people understand is just so critical. So I like what you said there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and having something's better than nothing.
Yeah.
Because if you're spending all those months not doing any of that reporting, then it kind of defeats the purpose of trying to push it through. So
yeah, and one thing you mentioned as well throughout the conversation is how things have evolved. You haven't been like, hey, let's get something going. Use it, figure out how we can improve it, and have an iterative approach. You're not like pivoting multi-touch and back and forth. You're just slowly over time improving the model, which I think is another thing to think about. Maybe for people getting started, you don't have to over-egg it at the beginning. Try and get something going, and then you can improve it over time.
Totally. And I think to summarize, I think this was really great too, because I think a lot of marketers are just looking for that one source, like someone to tell them how to do their reporting. And I think one of the things, the takeaways for this that you made it really clear to summarize is, do your homework, talk to finance, figure out what your bookings number are. Also think about your go-to-market strategy. Are you doing ABM? Do you have a small set of accounts that you're going after? And, or do you have a long sales cycle versus short sales cycle? All those things can really impact the numbers that you're looking at and how you're looking at them. And also then the dynamics of how your team is set and what drives behavior could also be what impacts how you create that reporting structure. So this is super useful. And I think a lot of people listening could take that alone as a key takeaway for them to then take the next step in developing that structure. So thank you so much for joining us. And
my pleasure. Yeah, it's really fun to talk. Always fun to talk to you guys. And this is, like I said, one of my favorite topics, so I could talk about it all day long. really
yeah,
been fun.
we'll have to do a part 2 if you're up for it.
Sure.
We could dive into, I mean, it's such a big topic, right? There's so many angles that you can take to discuss it.
For sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, we'll see everyone next time, the episode of Forward Thinking.
See ya. This is Charlie. So if you liked what you heard, hit like on the platform where you watch this. Also, leave a review. Honestly, we'd really, really appreciate it. You can also subscribe where you listen to your podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or even YouTube. And make sure you subscribe to our newsletter, which is packed full of exclusive content, updates for events or courses that we might be doing, all designed to elevate your marketing operations and B2B strategy. See you next time on Forward, and Forward it up.